الاتفاق اللي تحدثت عنه، الاتفاق الغربي، هل فعلا هو اتفاق حقيقي أم هي كمان نظرية مؤامرة كما صرنا عم نقرأ كثير؟ بعد توقف مع أول فاصل. عودة لمتابعة ترانزيت مع روبرت فيسك. روبرت، يعني من مصر إلى سوريا، سوريا كتبت مؤخرا مقال تتحدث فيه عن اتفاق دولي، اتفاق غربي سميته، الذي هو ممكن أن يترك سوريا بين يدي الأسد لسنتين إضافيتين. هذا المصدر لهذا الخبر يعني بالنهاية هو خبر من مصدر سوري.
I'm not going to talk about my sources anywhere in the world. All I'll say to you is that I have every reason to believe that it is accurate, and that despite the words of Mrs. Clinton and the Russian foreign minister, I believe there is an understanding that the Russians will have a role in the new Syria. They will, I'm sure, anyway. They will maintain, if they wish, their military base at Tartus. But that the Saudis and Qataris will be encouraged to run oil pipelines through Syria to the Mediterranean to Europe. Because at the moment there is one question mark which haunts Western nations, but they don't talk about it, and that is, what if Mr. Putin turns off the oil tap to Europe? So we need pipelines that come through the Arab world to the Mediterranean without going Baku, Russia, Eastern Europe.
بس اليوم بهيدا التوقيت يعني عم بيفكروا بتمرير خط أنابيب نفط بهيدا الوقت اللي عم بيصير فيه بسوريا، إنه يكون الخط من سوريا. When there is a new Syria, it can also have a pipeline from Iran. You notice one of the things, we journalists make a big mistake sometimes. We see something on television, and then we write about it, and then the television broadcasts what we write, and it starts going round and round like a ball. And have you noticed, for example, that in the past few weeks, all the talk about Israel attacking Iran, America attacking Iran, has gone quiet? I don't hear it anymore. It's not on CNN, it's not on Fox News, it isn't largely on television even in the Middle East, a little bit in Iran, but by and large it's quietened down. And I believe the reason it's quietened down is that the West has realized they're going to need Iranian oil flowing freely through the Mediterranean too. So why don't they bring the Iranians into their arms and say, all right, look, let's try and put aside the issues of whether there is a nuclear force going to exist in Iran, and just try and deal with it as another state, an ordinary state. More sanctions are being levied against Iran, of course, but I think you'll find there's a bigger picture, and that the Europeans and the Americans and the Russians and the Iranians and the Saudis and the Qataris, of course, are going to find common interests in Syria. ايه بس يعني اللي انت كتبته نقلته عن مصدر سوري فقط، يعني ما كان في مصدر غربي آخر لتأكيد هذا الخبر.
Are you encouraging me to have Western sources? Najat,
إذا بدك.
Listen, I have one thread I always follow. Let me answer your question. I have one thread I have in living in Lebanon. I do not go to Western embassies. I don't talk to Western diplomats of any kind. I do not, I have very few Westerners whom I even know here, maybe the International Red Cross, because I think if you're going to live in the Arab world, you should make sure that all your friends are Arabs. If you want to know what the West thinks, I can go and live in London. I don't need to live in Beirut. I'm not telling you that this is a Syrian source, but it is a source from this region. And I'll tell you that the Lebanese and Syrians are both very intelligent people, so you can take a guess on that. But the fact of the matter is that there are talks between various powers, between Europe and Arab powers about Syria, not just at Geneva. They go on here, they go on, I think, also in Damascus still. And these people do not speak with the same voice as Mrs. Clinton or Mr. Lavrov. Mrs. Clinton talks too much, actually. She goes on and on and on and on. I keep seeing her press conferences. But there are deeper understandings in this part of the world than just what people say for newspapers or television, which is my criticism about we journalists always acting like an echo chamber, an echo of the voices of politicians. And I think the real stories under the ground are often quite different to what we think.
روبرت، يعني بالموضوع الامريكاني يعني في انتقاد على الامريكان انه بالعكس مش عم يحكوا كفايه، وخاصه على موضوع سوريا. يعني في وجهتين نظر. ارون ميلر مثلا بيعتبر انه رغم انه في حماوه بالوضع بسوريا الا انه الرئيس الامريكاني لا يزال يحافظ على بروده اعصابه، وبيعتبر انه اخر استطلاع للراي انه 83% من الجمهور الامريكي يحبذ انه تركز الاداره على المشاكل الداخليه وليس المشاكل الخارجية. بالمقابل فريد زكريا بيتحدث بالتايم عن أنه يجب أن يكون هناك تعاون مع روسيا من أجل إنهاء الوضع بسوريا، ويعتبر أنه يعني بتتحول موسكو من جزء من المشكلة إلى جزء من الحل. أنت شو وجهة نظرك بالموضوع السوري؟ إلى أي من هاي النظريتين أقرب؟
Look, I've been going in and out of Syria for 36 years, for the years I've lived here. And I'm still not certain I really understand Syria as I would like to understand it. I certainly don't think that American politicians understand Syria. I'm talking about the country, not the dictatorship, not President Bashar. For example, I was in Damascus just before Christmas, and Syrian television asked me to do an interview with as many cameras as you're using today. And against my better judgment, I decided I would do the interview. But I told the reporter, the Syrian reporter, I will print in my paper all the things you cut out. We did the interview, and they broadcast the whole lot. Even when I said Bashar al-Assad is running out of time, there it was on Syrian television. They broadcast it. Do you know, I still don't know why they did that. Was it that they wanted to show that they could put Robert Fisk on Syrian television and let him say what he wanted? I did say. I said, you can't infantilize, you can't make children out of the Syrian people. And it wasn't cut at all, it was all repeated perfectly. Why did that happen? There are still mysteries in Syria that I don't understand. That's a personal example of what I mean. You know, what's happening in Syria now is an enormous tragedy, as I'm sure we would both agree. The way in which the Syrian nation is tearing itself apart is a terrible, possibly the most tragic country in the Middle East now, although at one point we thought it might be Libya, and then suddenly. And I'm not sure how it will resolve itself, but you can remember, of course, that apart from the Lebanese and the Egyptians, the other Arab nation that really distinguished itself in fighting for its independence against imperialism was Syria, fighting the French. And the Syrians were absolutely at the forefront of Arab nationalism in doing that. I think it's possible that Syria might be able to bring itself under control, but at the moment everybody is tearing away at it like eating.
بس أنت كمان كتبت بواحد من مقالاتك تحدثت عن إنه يعني بشار الأسد لا يستطيع أن يراقب كل ما يجري في سوريا وفي عدة مواقع. يعني إلى أي مدى اليوم بشار الأسد يحكم سوريا؟
I think he is. What I meant in the article, what I was saying in English, was that he didn't have his hands on everything that was happening in the country in the way that he did before. Because too much has happened. No, I'm not saying this. I mean, he's still the leader and he's still the president, and I think he's making decisions. What I'm saying is that individual events have got so out of control that he doesn't always know what's happening in a particular village. He knows about another village. But he knows what's going on. He knows exactly what is happening. He went to Homs after that first big bombardment. Don't tell me that he and his wife Asma, they're intelligent people. They're bright. They know what's happening inside Syria. And they know if they're not being told the truth by other members of the regime, they'll see it on television anyway. And they see the same films and moving pictures that you and I do. They know what's happening. Now, it's not a question of acquitting anyone. I just don't believe that Bashar now has his hand on every part of the country as he would have had a year and a half ago.
ورغم ذلك تقول أنه رح يبقى سنتين.
I think the Europeans are perfectly happy to see him stay for another 2 years if that will lead the way to a transition. And I think the Russians feel the same way about it. This is part of what I understand is actually really happening over Syria. I don't think the European Union is pushing as hard as, for example, the French or the British Foreign Secretary claims. I think that the Europeans are quite happy to let Russia try and deal with the Syrian problem, and at the same time to look at their own economic future as being more important than Syria. Remember, foreigners only take an interest in the Arab world when they themselves have interest. They're not doing it for your sake. France doesn't love Lebanon because Lebanon wants to be loved by France. It's the same thing. What you have is a series of foreign powers which are trying to bring about a resolution in Syria, and if that means keeping Bashar for 2 more years, I think that's what they'll do.
تركيا ما حكيت عنها. تركيا هل يمكن أن يعني بتبقى متفرج؟
You know, the Turkish army is in a lot of problems at the moment. It's got trials going on in Turkey of army officers who have been accused of trying to overthrow the regime, which was democratically elected. So I don't think the Turkish army is in any mood for foreign adventures. Now, I've heard them say, you know, they may have to cross the border, but they didn't even retaliate when one of their aircraft was shot down, and Bashar al-Assad did go so far as he could to apologize for that. He didn't intend it to happen. He claims he didn't know it was Turkish at the time, which may or may not be true. You know, I think that Erdogan, which is how you have to pronounce his name, I'm told, in Turkey, I think he's a very smart guy. I was in Turkey for again, just before Christmas, after I'd been in Damascus, and I thought he was the first person to understand the Arab awakening. Erdogan came out spot on and said, we support it. And you remember, suddenly you could see Turkish flags flying in the Ottoman Empire. I never thought I'd see an Ottoman flag flying again. And I think that Erdogan and his party were very shrewd. They went to Egypt, they gave their support immediately to the revolution. And that was possibly the most immediate and bravest step that any regional country has made. Remember, Turkey was behind and for the revolution before Obama was, and he was supposed to be the great Democrat president of the United States. I thought Turkey's handled its politics very well. Its army is not very good at politics. I don't think we're going to see Turkey invading northern Syria.
يعني باختصار الموضوع السوري برأيك موضوع طويل رح ياخذ وقت طويل حتى انهاء هذه الأزمة، وهل برأيك انه يعني الكلام اللي حكي عنه أنان عن حرب أهلية، يعني حرب أهلية بدأت فعليا في قلب سوريا؟
Look, it is a civil war, isn't it? I think I'm afraid to say, and it has been for a long time now. Even when I was in Damascus, which is now 8 months ago, people were talking about a civil war then. Christian friends of mine were very frightened in Damascus. I wouldn't take anything that Kofi Annan says seriously. He's been a total failure in everything he's ever done in the United Nations, and he's a total failure again. It's not the UN that's going to solve this problem of Syria. It's going to be much bigger powers than the United Nations has.
على كل روبرت بدي أحكي أكثر على موضوع سوريا وتأثيراته على الموضوع اللبناني، ولكن أيضا بعد توقف مع فاصل ثاني. عودة لمتابعة ترانزيت مع روبرت فيسك. روبرت، يعني أنت موجود بلبنان، بتعرف كل التفاصيل اللبنانية وخاصة بالسياسة الداخلية وبالأحزاب وبكل المناطق حتى. كيف عم تقرأ التداعيات اللي عم بيصير بسوريا على لبنان؟
Well, you know, I'm going to tell you a funny story. Some years ago, when I was launching the Arabic edition of my book, The Great War for Civilization, I launched it in Nabatea. And a man who had a very big beard, but I don't think it was Hezbollah, I think he was an Amal guy, but he said, Mr. Robert, as an Englishman, what do you think is the future of Lebanon? I said, stop asking Englishmen what the future of Lebanon are. You'll do much better if you go to Hermel and ask people in Hermel, or Batroun, what the future of your country is, and the effects of Syria. We didn't say that then, of course. If you want to know what the future is, stop asking foreigners what the future of your country is. Look, I've said and written many times that while I can see all the dangers to Lebanon of Syria, and the Lebanese tell me about the dangers all the time, I don't think the war is actually going to come to Lebanon from Syria. I don't think it is.
مع أنك كتبت عن القلق على لبنان من حرب أهلية.
I've written it in my book as well, of course. And the danger, I've always thought, as indeed a very prominent member of Lebanese society told me, is that if he felt really trapped, Bashar would push the war into Lebanon. Desperate, I mean, by trapped. But you see what happened in Tripoli, and I was going up to Tripoli, of course, each time there was violence in Tripoli. At the end of the day, Tripoli did not fall into civil war. It did not fall into, I mean, there were several days of terrible events, but it didn't continue. And one of the things I feel now, and I know they're not very many in numbers, but during the real civil war, a lot of people, especially from educated classes, sent their children abroad to study in Geneva, London, Boston, wherever. And these children have come back and do not accept the confessionalism of their grandparents and their forefathers and foremothers. They want to see a different kind of world here, and I don't think the Lebanese want a war here, and I don't think they're going to permit it. As Lebanese people, we're not talking about the president or the army or the police, we're talking about Lebanese people. I don't think they want a war here, and I don't think they're going to have one. I'm much more optimistic now than I was a year ago.